Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Dilley. I'm going to move on to a different topic, general case strategy against Mr. Castleton. Can we begin on the 29th of September 2005, poll 000723889. Thank you very much. This is a memo to yourself from Denise Gamak. Who was she?
She was a solicitor who used to work at Bond Pierce, and for a time she had conduct of the case before me, before she left.
Is this a briefing note, essentially, to you about the Lee Castleton case?
It is.
If we scroll down, there is some background. And she says, CMS have been passed bulk instructions from Royal Mail. Who are CMS?
CMS stood for Credit Management Services.
And is that part of Bond Pierce?
Yes.
So they've been passed bulk instructions from Royal Mail via Stephen Lister to prosecute sub-postmasters/mistresses for losses that Royal Mail say occurred during the course of their employment. Indeed, the losses normally lead to their dismissal. Then it says, traditionally, Royal Mail's approach to this has been to prosecute the former employee for theft and to get them convicted to make a public showing of the fact that these losses will not be tolerated. However, the focus now is very much on recovering the money rather than obtaining a conviction. Were you aware of a change in strategy as far as the Post Office was concerned?
This note tells me that there was a change of strategy, but I don't recall being aware beyond this note. I should say that the first paragraph in this note contains a material inaccuracy.
And which is that?
CMS have been passed bulk instructions from Royal Mail via Stephen Lister to prosecute sub-postmasters. We didn't do any prosecutions. This case wasn't a prosecution, it was a civil claim.
So in fact, it may be intended to say that they've been passed bulk instructions to take action against sub-postmasters.
To pursue civil claims.
Yes. Traditionally, their approach was to prosecute, but now they're moving on to recovering money.
That's what the note tells me, yes.
And from your experience of the Royal Mail and the Post Office, can you understand, or did you understand, why there was that move?
Well, the only knowledge I have of this is what this note tells me.
So in your long time dealing with the Post Office and the Royal Mail, they didn't give you any indication as to why they were moving to taking more civil recovery actions, civil actions?
My long time.
Well, how long were you involved?
This was the first case I'd worked on.
Yes. And subsequently?
I set it out in my statement. I was involved in 2 other cases.
So in your time involved in this case and those 2 other cases, and what looks like quite a considerable amount of correspondence between yourself and Mandy Talbot, for example, quite a lot of communication over that period. Did she or did anybody else give you any indication as to why that strategy had changed?
Not as far as I recall, no.
Did you suspect any reason for that change?
I'm not sure that I considered it much.
Can we go back, please, to poll 000726669? This is the note of the 24th of February 2006. And we saw this note earlier, and it's the first paragraph where it says, internally, the Post Office feels conflicted about which direction to go in with the Castleton case. The Post Office believes the Horizon system is robust, but the downside is the costs in Post Office's time and money in proving the negative, i.e. that there are no faults and that it is expensive. Now, For example, Mandy would need to get a report from Fujitsu, who are apparently having difficulty with writing in plain English. That's the passage I took you to earlier.
It was.
Were you aware that a concern that the Post Office had was that it was difficult to prove that there were no faults with the Horizon system? Legally.
Yeah, let me set the context to this conversation. Mr. Castleton's solicitors had put various points to us in exchanges of correspondence, to us by which I mean my firm. One example of which was a report by Bentley Jennison, but over the life of the case, there were a number of others. My approach, and you can see this time and again, and I relearnt it when I reread the file, my approach was to go to Post Office to try to find the person who could address the concern put to us, to understand what the answer was, and then to be able to understand whether it was a real issue and to respond appropriately to Mr. Castleton's solicitors. And so I suspect my work in dealing with that, and one example of which is a report disclosed to us, I think it might have been on a without prejudice basis by a firm of accountants called Bentley Jennison. So the way I suspect that came across the Post Office is that Stephen Dilley was running around trying to prove a negative, because in a sense I was.
And that proving a negative, i.e. that there are no faults, is a difficult burden for the Post Office to overcome.
It was, particularly in circumstances in which we believe the allegations were not specific or insufficiently specific.
Can we look at poll 0006962, please? This is an attendance note of the 11th of September 2006. I think we've already looked at it. It's the attendance note where there was a conference with council, and it's the significant meeting with various Fujitsu witnesses.
Yes.
Could we please look at page 5, and there is a summary of the meeting with Mandy Talbot.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom of page 5, sorry. Tom explains that the big issue in this case was proving the loss. Mm-hmm. Horizon is like a big calculator, and it can be changed after the event. Mm-hmm. Tom went on to explain why. Just pausing there, are you aware of what was meant by being able to change after the event?
My recollection, which I've explained in my statement, is, and it might be contained in this note higher up, is that during this meeting, Catherine Oglesby, who was Mr. Castleton's retail line manager, told us that sub-postmasters could change information in Horizon after the event. I don't recall, however, the specific way or the context in which she was saying that.
The only way to prove the loss is in taking the starting position and the ending position and see what the difference is. Richard Morgan explained that the alternative is to say that we rely on the admission of the cash accounts, i.e. that they were signed by the sub-postmaster. And it goes on to say, it's not easy to prove that the post office is owed money. To achieve proof will cost more money than the claim is worth. Anne Chambers will be persuasive, but she is investigating an occurrence where the sub-postmaster said that the electronic banking authorization and said that the system could not rescind it. Kath Oglesby was sensitive as to whether the decision was taken in advance of the hearing to dismiss Mr. Castleton. This doesn't affect the case legally, but it isn't great PR. However, the accounting work to be done with litigatory, the opening, I think it may be litigating, the opening audit to see where the cash had gone. We will move the territory away from Horizon to what cash came in and what cash went out. Their defence is that the Horizon system was to blame, but they haven't really made their defence very clear. So is it right to say that the strategy that had been developed by September of 2006 was to rely on the admission of the cash accounts, that they were signed by the sub-postmaster, and the Post Office's case was trying to move the case away from the Horizon system?
It is partly right, yes. But it isn't the complete story, because we we sent the 2 letters to BDO in August, one of which asked them to prepare an IT report, which I think we must have ultimately asked them to pause on. But the other issue is this. We didn't know at that point in time whether Mr. Castleton would produce himself an IT report, by which I mean an IT expert's report. And if he had done so, we were ready to meet the case, but that didn't come. So that's why I mean it was partially right.
Did you feel that you had provided him with sufficient disclosure in order to properly instruct and inform an expert?
Yes.
Can we look at paragraph 304 of your witness statement? It's WITN 04660100. Sorry. Thank you. It's page 133 of that statement.
I've got it in hard copy.
It says, I've summarised the key parts of the amended particulars of claim much earlier in the statement. The relevant point from this is that Poll pursued this matter as an accounting claim. In this regard, Poll needed to carry out a reasonable search for relevant accounting documents for the purposes of disclosure. It seems as though the strategy that was adopted avoided, in your personal view, the need to make disclosure of Horizon problems because you were focusing on the fact that it was an accounting claim.
You have a look at paragraph 305,
Yeah.
306, 307, 308, which then talks about the other side of the coin, which is Mr. Castleton's defence and counterclaim. And what I have said in paragraph 303 is I thought it would assist the inquiry if I set out the statements of case, plural, because that's the framework through which disclosure in a civil claim is done.
I'm sorry, what's the point that you would like to make from that?
Statements of case, plural. So it wasn't just about Post Office's amended particulars of claim, it was also about the defence and counterclaim. And I had spent some time trying to understand the points that Mr. Castleton was putting to us about the IT issues he said he was experiencing.
And did you think that you had made sufficient inquiries and received sufficient information from the Post Office and Fujitsu to properly satisfy yourself that that wasn't something that needed further investigation?
Yes, I did.
Can we look at the BDO report that was obtained? That's poll 000699592. Sorry, this is a letter from BDO. So there came a point at which you had instructed the chartered accountants BDO Stoy Hayward to carry out an investigation into the matter and write an accountancy report. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
This is an early letter from them, the 5th of September 2006, where they set out some initial findings. If we look at the first page, if we could scroll down, they say, we realise this is a complex matter with possible implications that are far wider than just Mr. Castleton's operation of his sub-post office. Had you made it clear to BDO that actually what you were looking at was a wider challenge to the Horizon system?
I wasn't looking at a wider challenge to the Horizon system. I knew about, and we talked about this morning, the cases of Mr. Bargeorge and Mr. Bilku, And then there were two other cases mentioned, which if you take them at their highest, total 4. I knew there were 14,000 branches, and those 4 together, if you take them at the highest, is less than 0.03%. So,
What about the class action that was referred to?
well, I've talked about that this morning. The only cases we were talked about, that we were told about, were Bargearge and Bilko. So I don't think the phrase class action was right.
What about the spreadsheet that was being compiled?
Well, there were two cases mentioned on it, so that are referred to in that email to which you directed me. I mean, is it as a proportion of the network? It's minuscule.
It wasn't you that gave BDO the impression that this matter had far wider implications?
BDO, I don't think I can add to my evidence about what BDO knew. I think the implications, the wider implications which we talked about this morning, were more that over the course of this case, Post Office's motive changed, and it became for them about showing that they were willing to stand firm to defend a system that they believed and Fujitsu believed was fine.
Can we move to page 3 of this document, please? And it's the bottom of page 3. Just going to read for the transcript what they say about their early indications of problems with the Horizon system. They say, we have found there is some indication of possible problems with Horizon from our initial review of the electronic information you sent us. You sent the transaction summaries from January, February, and March 2004. In theory, the system should reflect the double entry nature of each transaction, e.g. the system should show the sale of a stamp and the receipt of the cash paid by the customer. Therefore, the Horizon transaction entries for a period should total 0. From our initial review, we can see that the March balances, but January is out by £2.47 and February is out by £4.05. We have found which transactions cause the differences and will investigate them in due course. Although these are very small amounts, they do indicate that some problems may exist, i.e. that the double entry is not being put through. And I'll take you now to the actual final report. That's
Sorry, there wasn't a final report.
the final draft report, shall I say.
Yeah.
Poll 000699955. So you've made very clear that there was no final report.
No, there wasn't.
Did you ask for the work to be stopped at this point when you received the report?
Can I just take a moment to find where I deal with this in evidence, because I think it's answered in my statement?
Well, you can speak to it now as well. We
Yeah.
have what you said in your
But I just
statement.
want to... Sorry,
can
it's a
certainly-
long statement. I'd like to refresh my memory, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm told it may be paragraph 140.
Thank you.
that assist? And how does it assist?
I think you were asking me about the finalisation of this report and what paragraph 141A to G explain is where we got to on that report and why it was not finalised. And I'm happy to take the inquiry through that if that would assist.
In summary, is it right to say that you were instructed not to disclose it?
That was one of 7 reasons why it wasn't finalised. So it would be a summary, but it wouldn't be complete.
Okay, would you like to give us briefly the 7 reasons why you consider it wasn't disclosed?
Yes. Pursuant to the order of Master Turner of the 23rd of October, it was envisaged there would be a sequential exchange of accountancy experts' reports. This was so that Post Office's accountancy expert could consider any specific allegation Mr. Castleton was making and respond to it. We never received an accountancy expert from Mr. Castleton. I'll pause here incidentally to say I know that he had one, but we never got it, so I don't know what it said. Secondly, the draft report from BDO was supplied to me after a time when the court had ruled that the parties could not adduce expert evidence. We were debarred. The third point is that before receiving this report, counsel was content that Post Office's case was made out on the basis of the witnesses of fact. So we'd not decided even before getting it, we'd definitely use it in any event. The fourth reason was this was only supplied in draft, and we would have wanted BDO to corrected it for any errors, although noting it was their report and they would have had to have been content with its accuracy to have finalised it. The next reason is that I'm not sure it would have been possible for BDO to have corrected any errors and finalised their draft report in the 7 days prior to trial. I'm not sure actually we would have also got permission to use it out of time. The next point is that counsel advised us not to disclose it, and he didn't think Post Office needed it to prove its case. And the final point is, as you rightly said, that Mandy Talbot instructed me not to disclose it.
Thank you. Can we look at page 6, please, which is the introduction in terms of reference. The authors say there at 3.1.2, I've been asked to focus on the issue of whether the losses can be proved arithmetically.
Yes, that's right.
Was that at your request?
Yes.
And can we look at page 7? It goes on to address sources of information at 3.2. Is it right to say that no information in respect of this report was sought from Fujitsu, the providers of Horizon? Gosh,
it was a long time ago. Let me just think for a moment.
I'm happy for you to read 3.2 to yourself, if it is.
Thank you. I think in order to properly answer that question, to be confident about my answer, I'll need to be taken to the letter to which I referred to you this morning, which was the letter of the 22nd of August that I sent to BDO about an accountancy report that might contain the answer to the question.
Well, it may be that we look at that in due course, but looking at the sources of information that are set out in BDO's report, is there any suggestion in that they were, for example, provided with information that there might be bugs, errors or defects in the Horizon system?
Well, first of all, it's right to record that this report that they were producing was an accountancy report and not an IT expert report, and we didn't pretend it was. But the information I think that they were provided with, which I think must ultimately have come from Fujitsu, is contained at 3.2.3, which is the transaction and events records, unless there's any other source of information on the following page. So yes, the various witness statements. So if any of the witness statements with which we had supplied them with include, so for example, if we supplied them with Anne Chambers' witness statement, if we had supplied them with Andy Dunks's witness statement, he was somebody else from Fujitsu, that would have set out that side of things. But I'm ever so sorry, I just can't remember now the particular documents that we had sent to them without going back through the records thoroughly.
Would you accept that there is no record there of them been provided outside of for example, the witness statements, detailed information about bugs, errors or defects that may have been in the Horizon system?
Not outside of the witness statements, but Anne Chambers' statement, for example, set out the investigation that she'd carried out. But there, no, not outside of that.
Because I think you said that Anne Chambers wasn't investigating the Horizon system, she was just investigating Mr. Castleton's branch.
Yeah, but the systematics branch, but not more broadly, no, you're right.
Can we look at page 13, please, where there is a description of an overview of Horizon? If we scroll down, 5.2.1 says, each transaction should be double entry accounting basis. For example, the sale of the postage stamp for cash will show that Horizon as a sale and as an increase in the cash balance.
Mm-hmm.
If we scroll down to 5.2.3, the system is designed to record all financial transactions at the post office. Is it right to say that that is an assumption? It's not something that they are saying definitively occurs?
I just can't remember, it was so long ago. I'm sorry.
5.3.5, please. It says, operating a modern computer system such as Horizon should reduce the scope for staff error. Many transactions are dealt with by scanning barcodes on products such as books, of stamps and other products are entered by using a touchscreen system where the clerk selects the item sold from a picture menu. The need to add up the price stamp sold and similar manual entries should be eliminated. There is also a simplification in the Horizon prints postage labels, which eliminates the need to use high-value stamps for parcels, etc. Clearly, this will never eliminate the possibility that a clerk may give the wrong change or pay out too much in pensions. Again, the suggestion or the statement there that Horizon should reduce the scope for staff error, reading that now, do you think that they were provided with detail of bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system, or sufficient detail of bugs, errors or defects in the Horizon system?
As I say, we're asking them. This was an accountancy report. This was not an IT report. So I can't amplify the evidence I've already given you about what they were provided without being taken to the primary document. And I'm happy to do that if it would assist the inquiry, but that's the limit of my memory.
Can we look at page 18, please, 6.1.1? The Horizon system records every accounting transaction at a post office from the sale of a single postage stamp to the receipt of cash for the weekly payment of pensions. The system operates on a double entry system in which it's possible to extract a trial balance in the form of a weekly cash account. Looking at all of this, I appreciate you say it's an accounting report.
Yes.
But knowing what we know now about the Horizon system, do you think that they were provided with sufficient information about bugs, errors or defects in the Horizon system?
Well, you probably know more now than I do, because my involvement was confined to this case and two other cases that I've described in my statement. I'm not pretending I don't. I certainly am aware of Mr. Justice Fraser's two judgments. But, I had no reason to believe at the time that they weren't provided with enough information. I've no reason to believe that now either. In particular, I thought they had and think they had more than sufficient information. But if this was an IT report, I would have expected them to be supplied with different information. Quite what that looks like after the passage of all these years, I'm not sure I'd be able to tell you.
If we scroll down, they refer to addition errors.
Yes.
And they say, I've looked at the 3 transaction spreadsheets and observed that 2 out of the 3, January and February, do not add up by small amounts of £2.47 and £4.05. I've identified that the £2.47 falls in week 42, the period Mr. Castleton has tried to reconcile manually. and that it is represented by two separate amounts of 92p on the 12th of January and £1.55 on the 15th of January. If we continue to scroll down, he summarises at the very end of this section, so 6.2.4, he says, I do not have an explanation for these errors, but my review of the transactions listings for the 3 months has given no indication of any other errors. And I think he addresses this in his final conclusions. That's actually, if we go back to page 4, it's 2.12a. He says, my conclusions can be summarised as follows, and A is, the only indications of possible computer problems that are apparent from the accounting records are 3 very small differences in the cash account trial balance, but each are less than £5. This is discussed at section 6.2. So it does look as though he was looking into whether there were possible computer problems, doesn't it?
Yes.
And in fact, he has found a difference in the cash account.
Yes.
So even without information from Fujitsu about bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system, there is at least an indication of a possible computer problem with Horizon in that report.
I read that conclusion differently to you. I read that conclusion as in essence that there was no, that in essence there was no computer problem, because the issues they found were really small. And look, this was a draft report. Had we got it much earlier in time, we would have had to work through that, and there may well have been answers to those questions, as we tended to find when other points were put to us and we went away and investigated them.
I mean, it does say that there are indications of a possible computer problem there.
Well, look, this is their report, but if you have a look at paragraph 6.6.4, I think there's some more information that would help the inquiry on this.
Paragraph 6.4.
6.4. If we can go to that.
Of this report?
Yeah.
6.4 or 6.6?
6.6.4.
I'm not sure that exists. What page do you say it's on?
Can we just do a scroll down until I find it? Sorry,
I mean, when you referred to 6.6.4, were you looking at a note of some sort, or is it your witness statement?
it's not paragraph 6.6.4 of my statement. Keep going down. Sorry, 6.4.4. If Mr. Castleton had suffered a problem with the Horizon computer system, I would have expected to see that he was reporting a daily cash balance that suddenly fell below the cumulative calculated cash balance. But that looking at the daily balances up to the next Wednesday, there would be the same difference, or at least a very close one, until the weekly reconciliation was performed. There is no indication that this was happening in January and February 2004 at Marine Drive. And further down at 9.3.1.
Can we just stop there? We'll pause at that particular one. Are you now saying that they are computer experts?
Only BDO can account for what they are, but this is written in their report.
But your evidence was that this was an accountant's.
It wasn't. It was. I think they were, from memory, I think they were, I mean, BDO are accountants, but experienced in dealing with reports where there are IT issues. But as to their actual experience, you know, after the passage of the thick end of 17 years since this was done, you'd have to put that to them.
Because although that particular paragraph may be helpful to you, the point that I was taking you to was right at the front of his summary of conclusions. Can we go back, please, to page 4, 2.1.2a? And he has indicated at the very beginning of his conclusions that there is a possible computer problem. Do you think that that was disclosable to Lee Castleton?
Well, can you go, please, to 9.3.1, because I think that...
We can return to that in a second, but I'm sticking with this particular paragraph. The identification of a possible computer problem. Was that disclosable to Mr. Castleton?
No.
No, it wasn't disclosable to Mr. Castleton.
This report was, in my view, not disclosable.
This report may not have been disclosable, but was that information disclosable to Mr. Castleton?
I don't know how that information would have been released without referring to this report, which had been debarred and which was only in draft, which wasn't a finalised report.
Did you discuss
there wasn't a, disclosure involves carrying out a reasonable search for documents. What documents would we have been carrying out a reasonable search for that we hadn't disclosed?
Did you discuss whether this information triggered any wider disclosure duties on the Post Office?
I anticipate that we would have discussed, I believe that I discussed this report with Council. I cannot now recollect, after the passage of time, all the details of this discussion, but Council was made aware of it, and he advised not to disclose it. I'm sure that if he'd had considered that it should have been disclosed, he would have given me that steer.
Leaving aside the particular report and disclosure of that particular report, do you think that that information should have set in motion some action on your part, on the Post Office's part, to provide further information to Mr. Castleton regarding issues with the Horizon system?
I mean, that talks about 3 small differences in the cash account trial balance. Those documents had been disclosed.
So you don't think it should have provided an incentive to look further?
No.
Out of fairness to you, please do take us to the passage that you wanted to in this report.
Please, may we have a look at 9.3.1?
So that is a section, it begins on page 32, and it is headed "The Accounting Records After Mr. Castleton Was Suspended." So it's one section of the report, and we have the conclusion in respect of that section at the bottom of the page.
Skipped over it.
Sorry,
Can we go to 9.3.1? This is his conclusion. I would have expected if there were computer problems affecting the accounting system that they would have continued in the weeks after Mr. Castleton was suspended. There is no indication that this has happened, and they were right about that.
And do you think that an accountant from BDO Stoy Hayward would be the right person to make that conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And that, of course, would be helpful to your case. But 2.1.2a, if we go back to page 4, it's the paragraph that I was drawing to your attention before. You don't consider that that information would have assisted Mr. Castleton in his case?
I don't think that I can add to the evidence on this report that I've already given to the inquiry.
Can we look at poll 000696112, please? This is an attendance note. It has your name on it, dated the 7th of September 2006. I believe this is after receiving BDO's first letter, so perhaps it was before the draft report, but after receiving the letter. And you say here, I had a telephone conversation with Tom Beezer. I think he was a solicitor at Bond Pierce.
Mm-hmm. He was a partner at Bond Pierce, yeah.
To discuss strategy in view of, and this is where the video comment is, so I think that's BDO. Did you, was this dictated or?
At the time, this is going to make me sound very old-fashioned, we used to dictate into a handheld device with these little cassettes. used to take the cassette out, attach it to a file and walk it down the corridor to be typed. And so sometimes either my diction wasn't as clear as it needed to be, or sometimes the quality of the cassette wasn't as good. Needless to say, video rhymes with BDO, and sometimes you get some slightly amusing typing like that.
So in view of BDO's letter about the proposed costs of £62,000 in relation to the accountancy report, also Tom expressing his concerns that the expert said that they found some early indications of possible problems with Horizon from their initial view of the electronic information. So it was sufficiently significant to you to put that in that note?
Yeah.
They say that Horizon should show the double nature of the transaction, e.g. sale of stamp and receipt of cash by customer. However, they said January is out by £2.47 and February by £4.05. My comment to Tom is that I thought those amounts were quite small and that this will probably turn out to be a rational explanation because I have met Fujitsu and they are utterly convinced of the integrity of their system, and really it's just an electronic calculator. So it is only as good as the person who puts information into it. In summary, you didn't think much of the discrepancy and you were satisfied with Fujitsu's explanation.
And the conclusions in BDO's draft report, to which I've also taken the inquiry.
Can we look at the final paragraph there? It says, agreeing with Tom that the strategy should be that we pick up the phone to Lee Castleton's solicitors, point out to them that Castleton has made an error analysing the cash account without necessarily disclosing the Fujitsu analysis, tell them what our accountancy expert alone is going to cost, and invite them to ADR, that's alternative dispute resolution, before we instruct an expert. Tom agreed, and we agreed that we should speak to counsel about this and Mandy about it on Monday. So having received that indication from BDO that it was possible for Horizon to show a discrepancy, your view was you should pick up the phone to Lee Castleton's lawyers and enter into dispute resolution without disclosing that information.
This attendance note is dated the 7th of November 2006. I received BDO's draft report by email on the 29th of November 2006.
Yes. So the letter that you received that summarised their initial findings that was then subsequently replicated in the draft report, you had received that letter, you'd received that information, and your view of the appropriate strategy to take in those circumstances were to phone Lee Castleton solicitors without disclosing the information and telling them how much the accountancy is going to cost, despite the fact that you knew that there was in fact something undermining your case in the potential report.
It doesn't say that was without necessarily disclosing the Fujitsu analysis. I think that is a reference to a piece of work carried out by Gareth Jenkins and Anne Chambers into cash account period. I'm going to get this the wrong way round. I think they did some analysis in relation to cash account period 42, which Mr. Castleton's solicitors had written to us about, I think, in June 2006, and said, look, there's a problem with this. You need to, we've got a problem with this issue. And we asked Fujitsu via Brian Pinder, who was sort of our liaison person at Fujitsu, to get somebody to look into it. And I wrote to a lady called Penny Thomas. It got passed on to Anne Chambers and Gareth Jenkins. They looked at it, and my distant recollection of their analysis was that actually it was fine. Now when I ultimately came to put it to Mr. Castleton's solicitors over the phone, I'm pretty sure they said, I know we wrote you about week 42, but we really went week 49. And they'd just done all this analysis for nothing. So I think that's what that analysis is meant there in brackets.
I appreciate my question was long. Can we please highlight in the first paragraph The words also Tom expressing his concerns that the expert said that they found some early indications of possible problems with Horizon from their initial view of the electronic information. Now, those concerns were about the BDO's letter, weren't they?
In that top paragraph, yes,
Yes.
that's right.
And your case strategy that followed that information, that there might be early indications of possible problems with Horizon, was not to pick up the phone to Mr. Castleton's solicitors and say, we may have found some early indications of problems with Horizon. It was, in fact, to not disclose that information and try and force settlement, wasn't it?
I don't think that is an accurate representation because, firstly, BDO's letter was not their finished analysis by any stretch. So we didn't know what their considered view was. And the strategy insofar as ADR was concerned, I mean, consistently throughout the case, we tried to settle. And so, and we've been rebuffed. In this instance, I think what we were trying to do was to settle before incurring additional cost. Because my experience of cases is the more money you incur, you can. I mean, the advantage of incurring more money and leaving it till close to the trial is you're in possession of more information, but the more cost you incur. And so if you can settle earlier, you need to think hard about that, and that's what we've been trying to do.
Mr. Dilley, you spoke earlier in your evidence about an ongoing duty of disclosure. Having received those concerns from BDO, you are picking up the phone to Lee Castleton's solicitors to point out an error that Mr. Castleton had made, but it's no part of your strategy to disclose to Mr. Castleton that, in fact, he might be onto something.
If we had got a finalised report from BDO, final report within BDO, within that expressed a considered view and that raised problems with the system, and it was a final report within the time period in which we were allowed to disclose it, I'm sure we would have done so. Absolutely. That was our approach. We didn't run away. We did not run away from issues put to us in this case. We investigated them time and again. Here, I don't know what BDO's view is. I know that they're looking at something, but they haven't finished their conclusion yet. It seems sensible to let that play out.
You took us very carefully through paragraph 141 of your witness statement, all of those different entries of the reasons for not serving the report on Mr. Castleton.
Yes.
Might a reason be that some of it was not helpful to you?
You're entitled to put that to me, and you must do so, but that was, I thought, that the BDO report actually, notwithstanding your points about these really small numbers, I actually thought, as I've recorded, that the BDO report was helpful. So I don't accept that that was a reason we did not disclose it. Not at all.
Is that a reason you didn't finalise it?
No, I've explained the circumstances in which it wasn't finalised. We were debarred. We couldn't use it. We were really close to trial. Could they have even done that in time? I tell you what you can see on the file, absolutely comes through, is me pressing BDO to get on with their report. But in fairness to them, we'd asked them to pause work because we'd gotten really close to settlement and then hadn't. So we'd paused all our preparation. And Mr. Castleton, Vice Solicitors, made a settlement proposal. We signed up the Tomlin order. They wouldn't sign. And so all this work that we'd got going to prepare for the trial, we stopped to save costs, to save money, because we thought we hadn't signed, but, well, we'd signed the Tomlin order, but it hadn't been signed. We thought we would get there and settle.
In the email that we still have up on screen, or the note that we still have up on screen, it said that an accountancy report would cost £62,000. Presumably, by this stage, by the time you had received that draft report, most of that expense had already been incurred.
I don't know, because I just really don't know, because the letter was quite short, and it took from the 7th of September to quite late in November to get even a draft. So if you it's really a question for BDO as to when they did their work and costs, but my view is that most of their work fell after this point in time.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't suggest otherwise. The draft report is dated the 29th of November 2006,
yes.
so very close to trial.
Yeah.
By that stage, overwhelmingly, the majority of the cost would have already been incurred, wouldn't it?
I would have thought so by BDO. I would have thought so. A lot of the costs would have been incurred by then. I don't know, because we never did finalise it, how much work it would have taken to finalise it. We would have certainly wanted them to correct it for any errors.
The additional cost, though, would not have been significant in the grand scheme of things, would it?
I don't know. I don't know what the additional cost would be. It's an event that didn't happen.
And it is your evidence that there was no motivation in respect of not finalising that report brought about by the first of their conclusions.
None whatsoever.
Can we look at poll 000699490, please? Tenth of October 2006, I was going slightly back in time, but I want to talk to you about the ability for Mr. Castleton to challenge the case against him. We have a note of a telephone conversation between yourself and Mr. Morgan. Paragraph 4 is the paragraph I'd like to read. It says, Richard thinks we should play some brinkmanship and press for a December trial. If they disclose an expert's report that harms us, then, as they are doing so late, we can always ask the court to vacate the trial. However, at the moment, they have not disclosed an expert's report, and he thinks that we should go to trial without one. However, he wants us to get client approval for this strategy. So as far as the expert's report was concerned, you were playing a strategy of brinkmanship. Is that what you understood the Post Office to have been playing?
Yes.
Can we look at poll 000724432? Less than a week later, 16th of October, a telephone conversation between yourself and Mandy Talbot. Mandy said she noted that I had problems getting from the Post Office copies of the opening audit, telling her that was correct, and that the reason we wanted it was to compare the handover position with the closing position to try to get Horizon out of the picture. Paragraph 3. Counsel was much happier with the case now that we had all these witness statements.
Yes.
And in fact thought that they were they were thorough, and we didn't really need expert evidence at this moment because the statements prove the case by themselves.
Correct.
Unless that is that Mr. Castleton's solicitors serve late expert reports from either IT or accountancy that we need to deal with. Counsel therefore wants to play some brinkmanship, again the word brinkmanship, with the other side, i.e. push for a December trial, but preserving our ability to get that adjourned if they serve a late report that we need to deal with. I said that we could prepare for a December trial if necessary, and I was happy to do so, but I was concerned to make sure that we could reply to any expert reports served by Castleton. I also think that our counsel was effectively trying to ambush the other side because he thinks that when we serve these 15 witness statements on them, they will be knocked reeling a bit. Mandy appreciates the tactics of this. She said that the only thing was with a December trial is that the post office get very busy before Christmas.
Correct.
I'm going to take you to one more document. Poll 0006943 18th of October, 2 days later, this is your note of your conversation with Mandy Talbot. She's spoken with Claire. I think that's Claire Wardle, the General Counsel at the Post Office at the time. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And Catherine, I think that must be Catherine Ogilvy. Is it? No.
No.
Sorry, no, Catherine.
No. It would be... I think there was a Catherine, someone or other in the legal team.
Thank you. They are happy to follow counsel's advice and go for a December trial purely as a tactic, even though acknowledging that is an unlikely event. However, if the other side seeks to, I think that must be produce evidence, we must preserve our ability to reply. So that is the Post Office agreeing to pushing for a trial in December and what has been described as ambushing Mr. Castleton with 15 witness statements. Can we look at poll 000696618, please? Now, there was a case management conference on the 23rd of October
Yes, there was.
2006, and this is the skeleton argument that was produced for that. The Post Office's position, paragraph 2, if we look at the end of paragraph 2, is that the claimant presently wishes to keep the trial date if possible. That is effectively keeping that December date.
Yep.
And then perhaps if we could look at the bottom of page 2. Experts. Pursuant to the order of Master Fontaine, the parties have permission to rely on the evidence of experts in the fields of accounting and information technology.
Yes.
This expert evidence is meant to go to the defendant's assertion that in some way the losses recorded by him were not real losses.
Yep.
The claimant has sought clarification of this, of the way that the defendant intends to make his case, but still does not understand how the defendant says losses did not in fact occur. The cost of expert evidence is high, in brackets even more so in a case worth only some £25,000. And the defendant's statements of case do not enable the claimant's experts to be instructed to focus on any particular aspects of the thousands of transactions conducted within the relevant period.
Yes.
The defendant accepts that sequential exchange is desirable. In the circumstances, the claimant invites the court to direct that there be sequential exchange of expert reports within a timetable that allows the claimant some time to respond. Alternatively, that there be no expert evidence at the trial, given that it is now so late and the defendant does not seem to have any expert evidence to advance.
Yes.
Now, this submission was made to the court at the time when you knew that you had 15 witness statements to serve on Mr. Castleton, including some from Fujitsu witnesses addressing the Horizon system. Is that right?
I'm just going to remind myself of when we did witness exchange.
So the reference to 15 witnesses was an email of a note of the 16th of October 2006. And this is the 23rd of October 2006. So shortly before, you had been talking about the brinkmanship on behalf of the Post Office and the service of 15 witness statements for the November trial.
In order to answer the point you're putting, can we find anywhere, because I think this will help the inquiry, can we find the order by consent of Master Fontaine, the 25th of August 2006?
We will have a break this afternoon, so we can certainly have a look.
What I'm wondering, but I just can't remember, is if at that point in time, and that order might tell us, if at that point in time we'd exchanged, I don't think we'd exchanged witness statements, but at one point I do remember we were ready to go on wanting to exchange, and Mr. Castleton wasn't. And in the end, we sent him our statements, and I can see from my little timeline at the beginning of my statement that Mr. Castleton's statements and summaries were provided on the 29th of November. I can't remember when ours came.
Thanks. Do you think that it was realistic for Mr. Castleton to be expected to produce an expert report in the absence of any significant disclosure on the wider horizon system? First,
I think in the circumstances of the case, it was realistic for Mr. Castleton to produce a report. We had, and he'd been given more than one opportunity to do that. On the 9th of March, we'd had a timetable approved by the court for bringing the claim to trial, into which Mr. Castleton's solicitors had inputted, and that was sort of timetable number one. The dates, though, got pushed back by consent of Master Fontaine on the 25th of August 2006 until we have two further case management hearings. There's a CMC on the 23rd of October and a PTR before His Honour Judge Seymour QC on the 27th of November. And my genuine view in this case is Mr. Castleton had a number of opportunities to produce expert evidence. And it was clear that after our disclosure was provided in May, Mr. Castleton's solicitors came back to us with what else they wanted to see, and we were on it and provided it. So I think they had a number of chances. They inputted into the timetable, so they were on board with that. I don't recall them saying to us, we've just not had a proper chance to do this.
do you think the Post Office or yourself recognise the practical or technical limitations that he would have had in obtaining an expert report based on bugs, errors and defects in the wider Horizon system?
In the wider Horizon system, we talked about disclosure this morning, and we didn't provide disclosure about other branches.
And do you think that caused him limitations in what he could really obtain in respect of an expert report?
I do think he had relevant information in relation to his branch.
Did he have relevant information in relation to the case that he was pursuing that was a wider attack on the Horizon system?
I thought so.
That's in the past tense. Do you think so now?
I should like to, in order to be able to properly answer that question, have a very deep understanding of the Horizons issues judgment in the GLO, and to really reflect on what other information, if any, might exist that I don't know about. And I think unless you do that, that's what you'd have to do to really properly answer that question.
The submission at the case management conference that, given it was only a £25,000 claim, the cost of expert evidence was high. Was it realistic to suggest that Mr. Castleton should incur that cost, knowing what you knew about his financial position?
Well, you say knowing what I know. We did know some things, but we didn't have a complete picture. We knew that he had before the event insurance. We didn't know how much, and I didn't know, in some instances that could have picked up the costs. What I also knew is that he'd already produced what I've recorded as the Bentley Jennison report, and his solicitors either told me or wrote to me at one point and said that Mr. Castleton is not a man without means, language they used. But what I can't absolutely and don't pretend to get away from is Mr. Castleton's means, I expect, would have been much less than the Post Office's means. You can't get away from that, and I can't change that in any litigation of this nature.
looking back, do you think the brinkmanship and the tactics were appropriate?
Yes.
Does it make
And
a difference that the post office was a publicly owned company, in your mind?
Just picking up very quickly on a point of brinkmanship, I thought that the brinkmanship point to me is that post office were taking a risk. It wasn't a risk, as I saw it, for Mr. Castleton. The risk was that he would produce something at a later stage that then they would have to deal with. But the idea behind that was if he produced a report, it would have more, which we believed and were ready to deal with if he did. That's why we sent BDO the letter on the 22nd of August. If it had more specificity, we could have produced our own more targeted report, which would have been more proportionate, because without that, you'd have had to have produced the general report. You know, where do you start and stop looking? It's like trying to board the ocean, potentially. So I thought the idea of, certainly of a sequential exchange was a good way of dealing with it. But I'm sorry, because can you put to me your second question again?
Given what we've heard, the emails that we've read about ambushing with 15 statements, for example, or words used, brinkmanship, do you think that that is appropriate where the claimant is a publicly owned company?
I mean, I think the word ambush that I think I use now was a bit strong because, you know, when I joined the profession as a trainee in 1999, people used to say that before the Wolf reforms came in, before the civil procedure rules, you could ambush the other side, but that had gone because the exchange of witness statements was mutual, simultaneous, you know. Everyone saw each other's at the same time. But what I do think it would be fairer to characterise that as is I suspect Mr. Castleton's solicitors were not expecting us to be as well prepared as we were, and we wanted to be thorough.
I'd like to ask you some questions about the nature of Mr. Castleton's alleged wrongdoing. Can we look back again at a document we've already looked at? It's poll 30071165, and it's the significant meeting of individuals from Fujitsu. If we scroll over the page, there is reference to Mr. Castleton's response to the request for further information, and it is dealt with Mr. Jenkins, and if we keep on scrolling, we can see that Mr. Jenkins addresses that. And then if I could ask you about page 4, is where you went through various call logs with Anne Chambers. It's at the bottom of that page. One thing to note at the beginning is she noted that she's third-line support, and only one of Lee Castleton's calls came through her. So although there's a long list of calls, in fact, she only had personal experience of one of them.
Yes.
Can we go to page 6? The pages 5 and 6, for some reason, I think are out of order. So,
Sorry.
In fact, page 6 comes before page 5. And then if we scroll back to page 5, this is... Sorry, if we scroll down page 6, just to have a look at that very briefly, there's reference to various call logs, and at the bottom, that's dealing with one particular call log.
Yeah.
And then if we turn back to page 5, we will see that's the same bit continued. If we scroll down half the page, halfway down, it says that it was Anne Chambers' feeling that it was sloppy inaccuracies rather than fraud. Additionally, as the postmaster is actually declaring discrepancies, this gives the impression of incompetence. At paragraph 379 of your statement, and in fact in your evidence today, I think you've said that you didn't feel that Mr. Castleton was dishonest.
No, I didn't, and I don't.
Can we please look at poll 000711040? This is the 24th of August 2006. It's an email from yourself to Richard Morgan. Can you tell us who Richard Morgan was?
Yes, he was counsel for Post Office, so we instructed him, and he was our barrister in the case.
You tell Mr. Morgan there at paragraph 2, you say, I've spoken to Greg Booth, the temporary sub-postmaster of Marine Drive,
Yep.
from the 21st of April to the 28th of May 2004, and have agreed to meet him on Wednesday next week to take a statement. The gist of what he will say is that he didn't have any problems balancing or experience any IT issues. However, he also made 2 other comments which were not especially helpful.
Yep.
He said Lee Castleton told him that it was only when he transferred cash to the suspense account that the problems seemed to multiply. Lee told Greg he hadn't taken any money, and Greg believes him. Greg believes that Lee Castleton was an inexperienced sub-postmaster, and before he was suspended, he sought support and help from the post office but didn't get it. He knows of another case, no names mentioned, where another branch lost money and different, I think is that regional line manager?
I think it might mean retail line manager.
Retail line manager, gave the sub-postmaster much more support in marked contrast to this case. He also knows Lee Castleton is speaking to other sub-postmasters.
Yes.
And you say, I assured Greg that Lee Castleton did get support, but perhaps the issue was that Lee Castleton didn't actually see all of that because work was done in other places such as MBSC. In any case, Greg's comments are unhelpful, which I think that's Lee Castleton might fish for in cross-examination, or I fear Greg may volunteer.
I suspect it meant to say Lee Castleton's counsel.
Thank you. So in essence, Greg Booth is saying that he believed that Lee Castleton hadn't taken any money.
Yes.
Could we go back, please, to poll 3069612, please? Um, 7th of September 2006, you say, explaining to Tom that I had a conversation with Castleton's solicitors earlier this week, and they say they had not ruled out ADR, but believe the whole case will turn on what the experts say, and there's therefore no purpose in having ADR until their expert, hopefully for them, comes up with something to win the case for them. Tom asked me if I thought that Castleton had taken money for himself, and I said he may not have done and may have mixed it with the car auction money. But this is just a hypothesis. However, he has persuaded himself for one reason or another that the computers may be at fault. Can we look again at the draft BDO report? That's poll 3069955. And it's page 5 of that report. BDO say, there is a suggestion by Mr. John Jones of the Post Office that Mr. Castleton had admitted receipts from a car auction customer which paid in large amounts in cash to its Gyrobank account. My conclusions are that the 3 large amounts that Mr. Jones refers to were correctly dealt with in the cash account.
Yes.
Is that the hypothesis that you had slightly earlier that BDO is saying is not actually right?
Quite possibly, yes.
Thank you, that can come down. So we have there your own witness saying that he wasn't dishonest, and Chambers suggesting it was sloppiness rather than something worse.
Yeah.
You had a theory, but that then has been disproved.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Post Office were sufficiently open-minded to other possibilities in this case?
I do, because when points were put to us, we went away and investigated them. That was our approach. So I set out in my statement a number of examples of us doing that. The Bentley Jennison report, not a CPR Part 35 expert report, came in and it put an issue to us, which at first I thought was quite serious. I went away and investigated it, and there was a benign explanation. At the Part 18 request, I went away and had a meeting with Fujitsu, which Paul knew I was going to have and was supportive of. I also subsequently met Andrew Wise, and I referred to the attendance note of the meeting in opening this morning. There was an issue raised into week 42, which Paul were happy to support Fujitsu to do some more analysis around. On the 21st of June, Ro Cohen raised an issue around software updates, which we found some information out from Fujitsu and put back to them to see if that would be an issue. When Greg Booth rang me up and said, actually, in my first witness statement, I said I hadn't had any problems with the suspense account, but I now have. We did a second statement, and Paul was supportive of that. An issue about something called a Tivoli events log arose late in the case. Paul were happy for us to disclose them and supportive of the action we took, which was not to oppose a continuation of the hearing. There was an issue raised to us, I think, in about November, December time about the computer going down. We went and checked that with Brian Pinder. Post Office were supportive of that. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Post Office believed that Mr. Castleton's, the information I was getting from them and the conversations we were having and emails we were getting is they believed the system was robust. But they were supportive of us, rightly supportive of us, testing that and testing the points put to us to make sure.
You're getting issue after issue pointing away from significant issues in the Castleton case. You've spoken a lot about settlement and why didn't Mr. Castleton settle.
Yes.
Did the Post Office at any point consider whether they should simply withdraw?
You can't.
Well, I appreciate there was a counterclaim, but did they at any point say to Mr. Castleton, we're happy to not proceed?
At pages 107 to 111 of my statement, I have tried to summarise all the steps that we took on behalf of Post Office to try to reach a resolution. And what Post Office could have done, in theory, is unilaterally serve a notice to discontinue their claim. They could have done that. There would have been two consequences of that. One, they'd been liable for Mr. Castleton's costs in relation to that claim. And two, it would have left live the counterclaim. And so all these, or certainly a lot of these issues we were litigating over would still have had to have been litigated and cost incurred. So withdrawing by serving a notice of discontinuance, even had Pol wanted to do it, would not have made this go away.
Can we look at Pol 0006944, please? This is an email from yourself to Brian Pinder. I'm going to read to you that second paragraph there. You've spoken to Greg Booth, who, as we heard earlier, was the temporary sub-postmaster.
Yes.
Greg spoke to me last week and reported that his computer froze on Wednesday the 25th or Thursday the 26th of October, I will clarify which day, whilst he was serving a customer and partway through a transaction. The transaction had not been settled. Mm-hmm. It related to a postage label. When he logged back in again, the computer had lost the transaction of £1.27. The computer did not prompt him to recover it. Greg is away this week, but I'll be contacting him upon his return to obtain a supplemental witness statement about this point. Prior to then, Greg's evidence was that he had never known the system to lose a transaction. In this particular case, Greg was up £1.27 up because he had taken money from a customer. However, I anticipate the reverse would have happened if he had been paying money out. Mm-hmm. So now you have Greg Booth telling you not only that he didn't think that Mr. Castleton was dishonest, but he now tells you that he, in fact, himself experienced a lost transaction.
Yes, it wasn't Post Office's case that Mr. Castleton had been dishonest. But yes, Mr. Booth told me there was a problem, and the right and proper thing to do was to talk to him about it, to understand it, to get under the skin of it, and to produce a second witness statement about it, whether or not that witness statement counted for us or against us. In the end, that's what we were going to do. In the end, when we investigated it and began to understand it, actually, I mean, Greg Booth puts this in his second statement. It was there was an issue which I put down as what I call user error, and so it was benign. But it was the right thing to do. You know, prior to that point, that was his evidence. Something had come up to change his evidence, and we put in a second statement.
Can we look at poll 000699418, please? 27th of October, you had a conversation with Greg Booth, who just received your letter, and then he describes the issue. And it says, I asked him whether he thought that the system could lose transactions totalling about £26,000, and he said no. This was the only time in all his years working as a sub-postmaster that he had known it to happen. However, he thought he should draw it to my attention. I mean, do you think he was qualified to answer the question of whether his particular error could or could not mean that the Horizon system was capable of losing £26,000?
I wanted to understand his... he had experience as a sub-postmaster, and I wanted to get... And I did not work the system, and I just wanted to understand what he thought. I didn't hold him up as... you know, an IT expert in, for example, or an expert in how the system worked, but I just wanted to understand his sense of it.
Can we now look at the statement from Catherine Oglesby in the Lee Castleton case? It's WBON 0000095. Thank you very much. And this is the statement that was filed on behalf of Catherine Oglesby. Can we look at page 15 of this statement, please? It's paragraph 53. So she says there, since Mr. Castleton had been suspended, the temporary sub-postmaster had worked with exactly the same Horizon kit, and the balance had continued to be fine each day within expected parameters. Mr. Castleton had not given any credible explanation for the unauthorised shortfalls. In the circumstances, I decided to terminate summarily. If we turn over the page, this was signed on the 19th of October, so it was shortly before you had that conversation with Greg Booth. Now, it's obviously right to say that Mr. Castleton, that Mr. Booth hadn't experienced problems at Marine Drive, but shortly after this witness statement was written, you were aware, and in fairness to you, you did evidence that in a statement, that the temporary sub-postmaster did experience a loss at another branch. Looking at this period of time, that can come down, thank you. You had a loss, albeit small, from the temporary sub-postmaster. You had that issue raised in the BDO draft report about possible errors with the Horizon system. You had all the various issues that we've discussed today. Was it not a time to re-look at, for example, your disclosure obligations or the conduct of the Post Office in this case? Was it not the time to question whether there were, in fact, problems with the Horizon system?
Well, in the light of what Greg Booth was saying, that's exactly what we did do. We did look at whether there was a problem, and we were satisfied with the answer.
You looked at a problem in relation to Mr. Booth's specific problem on that specific occasion.
Yes,
But did that not prompt you to dig a little bit deeper than you had been digging in relation to wider problems with the Horizon system?
We were entirely satisfied with what Mr. Booth said in his second statement. It was a problem that was resolved.
So I have a few more questions, but not many, no more than about 10 minutes, but perhaps we can take our break now. There are certainly questions to come from recognised legal representatives as well.
Yes, by all means.
Thank you.
So what time should we start again?
If we come back at 25 minutes past, please.
Okay, fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. I can see you on screen. We may be slightly early, but I think we can begin.
Very well.
Thank you. Mr. Dilley, I'm just going to bring up on screen the BDO letter of instruction because that's a document that you wanted to be brought up earlier. It's poll 000-71065. Is this the letter that you were referring to?
No.
No?
Can you see, this is the mistake I made as well. Third line in bold, IT experts report. The letter which generated the accountancy report says there, accountancy experts report. And although the accountancy experts report letter of instruction was not put to me by the inquiry, what I ought to have done, which I was trying to explain this morning, paragraph 130 of my witness statement, which deals with this, it's question 24 or 49 of the Rule 9 request, is I would have preferred, it's entirely on me and I'm very sorry, I would have preferred to also give to the inquiry, I know you already have it, but I would prefer to draw your attention, the accountancy experts report. We sent it in when I realised this. It might have been last week, but you already had it, of course.
So was BDO approached to provide an IT expert's report?
So long ago, but the conclusion I draw from this is that there were two letters on the 22nd of August. One was asking BDO to do an accountancy report, and that's the report that you've taken us to, the draft report. The other was this, asking them to do an IT expert's report. But the conclusion I draw, not from my memory, is that we must have said to BDO, pause on this, because in the end what happened is we wanted Mr. Castleton to produce his IT expert report so that we could do something more tailored and responsive to it.
Is another possible explanation that draft report that we have seen, in fact, was intended to capture both the accountancy aspect and the IT aspect of the report?
It's possible, but I don't believe at all that that's what it was doing.
Perhaps if we scroll down, there is a list of documents. If we keep on scrolling. And more scrolling, please. Thank you. If we could keep on going. Documents enclosed. If I could ask you just to have a read to yourself of the documents that were enclosed.
Mm-hmm.
And over the page, or further down. Am I right to summarise there that the information that was provided along with that letter of instruction did not contain wider analysis of the Horizon system outside of Mr. Castleton's own branch?
Yes.
I'm going to move on to a different topic, and that is the evidence of Anne Chambers. Could we please look at poll 000-73838? Just for the record, we do in fact have the other document. I won't bring it up on screen now because I'm not entirely sure that it is with those sitting behind me. But for the record, it is poll 000-71069. Anne Chambers, we have here her draft witness statement. And this early draft, if we look at page 3, contained a section on the help desk calls.
Yes.
Are these words drafted by yourself?
The way we prepared, the general way we prepared witness statements in this case is I went to physically meet almost all of the witnesses. We had a meeting with them, made notes on what they said, and then I tended to put together the first draft. It is entirely possible that I put this first draft together based on the meeting I had with Anne Chambers, but I don't have a specific memory of that anymore.
Do you tend to produce a statement that includes as much as you would like to, and ask the witness effectively to reduce it down if they need to?
I think that would be an oversimplification. The statement is, the way the statements are prepared is an iterative process. Is the witness's statement really important? They have to be completely content with it. In Anne Chambers' example, it was reduced from the first draft because I'm looking at those E numbers. My recollection is that those were references to Horizon System Help Desk call logs. And at the time, I think we were saying to Anne Chambers, can you just explain what these call logs meant? We know you didn't deal with them, but can you explain what they meant? And ultimately, she wasn't comfortable doing that. But Andy Dunks was, so we rightly took them out of her statement. But we just wanted someone to fulfill the narrative function of describing what they meant.
And we can see that in FUJ 001222885, where she emails you, it's the second email on this page, and she says, sorry, it's page 3. Thank you. She says, I'm somewhat concerned about my witness statement containing all the power help calls, given that I had no involvement at the time. I was unaware of problems at the branch until the 26th of February when the call was sent to SSC. The way it's laid out at the moment is neither a verbatim transcript of the calls nor my interpretation of what was probably meant at the time. I can provide the latter if that's what required, but there needs to be a clear delineation between what was stated then and comments I make now. I do not particularly want to be questioned on the handling of calls by HSH, since I did not and continue to have no responsibility for this. Can we look at, it seems as though she was not comfortable with the inclusion of...
Correct, and if she wasn't comfortable, the right thing to do was not to ask her about it.
Can we look at poll 000711092, please? 17th of August 2006. This is an attendance note made by yourself and a conversation with Anne Chambers. And similarly, it says, basically she felt uncomfortable commenting on any of the calls other than those she was involved in, etc. It's the second paragraph there. 7A will probably leave as it isn't really relevant, and paragraph 40 in the conclusion, she will have to review to see if she feels properly able to say that.
Yeah.
Anne will go over the statement and also put it in more into her own words and explain the limits of her involvement. She'll come back tomorrow. So you had drafted an original conclusion, paragraph 40, and she was considering whether she could properly say that.
Yes, that's right.
Perhaps can we look at that side by side with poll 73838. And that's the draft witness statement. And if we could, on the left-hand side, turn to the page 9. Thank you. So the conclusion as drafted by yourself was there are no reasonable grounds for believing that the information stored on the Horizon system would be inaccurate because of improper use of the computer terminal. To the best of my knowledge and belief, during the material time, the Horizon system was operating properly at the Marine Drive branch, or if not, any respect in which it was not operating properly was not such as to affect the production of audit record or accuracy of their contents. Thank you. Can we now please look at FUJ 00152292? This is a document that you've only recently seen. It comes from Fujitsu. It doesn't really add very much to what we've already seen, but I would like your thoughts on it. Those two can both come down. Thank you. It's an email from Anne Chambers to Gareth Jenkins, and she addresses the statement at the bottom. She says, "This hasn't had my full attention. Lots of people are on leave, and Martin landed me with a tricky Pol FS/FP issue. Also yesterday I got my witness statement, which is, as I expect you found, full of things I didn't say or do, including all those power help calls." Did you understand her to feel uncomfortable with the process at all?
It's right to record that she was not comfortable with giving evidence on the power help calls.
I don't think that is necessarily limited to the power help calls, where she says, full of things I didn't say or do, including the power help calls. Did you sense a general concern on her part in respect of the evidence that she was being asked to give?
It came to my attention in a document that I first saw on Monday in the additional documents bundle, which is basically a post-mortem by Anne Chambers a while later, that Fujitsu had not told her until shortly before the meeting, I assume, we had with her in June 2006, that we wanted her to give evidence. But I told Fujitsu that in April. But I didn't know that at the time. But that's in a document that she wrote after the Castleton case. But I didn't know that they'd not passed that on to her then.
Can we now look at poll 00069622, please? This is the meeting, the 11th of September note. Can we look at, please, at page 4? And it's the bottom of page 4, meeting with Anne Chambers. We went through Anne's statement. She said she had personally got a new set of referrals for 6 years. Now it says 3 to 4 years sub-postmasters had been complaining that there is a problem, or have complained if there is a problem. Sometimes there is a major, and it's not clear what, it may be something's highlighted there and photocopied, or something it's not entirely clear what's missing there. For example, all the cash and stock appears to have vanished out of the office. Now, I think you've said in your witness statement that your reading of that, if we could scroll up and perhaps just have the bottom of the page above, thank you very much. Your reading of this is that she said that there are 3 to 4 sub-postmasters each year. Isn't it equally possible that she was saying that for 3 to 4 years, sub-postmasters had been complaining that there is a problem with the Horizon system?
I wish my note, my dictation had been clearer. I checked the original, and it's not a highlighting issue. The word's missing, which suggests to me my dictation wasn't as clear. That's not my belief that that's what she was saying.
You say that's not your belief. I mean, you can't recall either way. Is that right?
I can't be sure, no. That is right.
If it was something that Anne Chambers had told you, would that have been disclosable?
in civil proceedings, you don't disclose information, you disclose documents. That's really different from the criminal proceedings. You carry out a search for documents. It's just, it feels like the two are being mixed up in the question.
Would that have caused you to rethink the reasonableness and the proportionality of your search if she had said to you that for 3 to 4 years sub-postmasters had been complaining?
Well, I'm not sure, even if that's what she had said, it would have done, because if you go a little bit further down somewhere, she says, sometimes there was a major and then there's a missing word. For example, all the cash and stock appears to have vanished out of the office, but these sorts of errors are singular and not continual. And the impression I got from that is there weren't systemic issues with the system because they were singular and not continual. And I certainly didn't get the impression, it was a long time ago, but I would remember it. I did not get the impression from that meeting with Anne Chambers that there was a bigger problem with the Horizon system. I didn't.
She's coming to give evidence next week. If her evidence is that she said that for 3 to 4 years sub-postmasters had been complaining, do you think that that should have prompted you to carry out a wider investigation of the Horizon system?
No.
If we scroll down, paragraph 5, in paragraph 6, in fact, she says that they want to delete paragraph 16. Now, perhaps we can look at FUJ 001222323. And can we look at paragraph 16? That's page 5. Do you think it's correct to say that that is the paragraph that at that meeting she would like to have deleted?
I'm not sure, without going to the part of my witness statement where I set this out. In the preparation of my witness statement, I went through every draft of Anne Chambers' system on our computer so that I could understand how we'd got from the first version to the final version. So it would help refresh my memory if we could go to the right part, if you could help me with that.
What I can do is I can bring onto screen the final witness statement, and that is perhaps could we keep that one on screen, and can we also see LCAS 0000112, and it's page 5 of that. Thank you. So on the left-hand side, if we can go to page 5, thank you very much. So the final version, this is the signed version on the left-hand side, it has been changed from there was no evidence whatsoever of any system problem, but the continuing losses and calls suggested the Marine Drive branch needed some business assistance. And it now reads, my conclusion was that there was no evidence whatsoever of any system problem.
Yeah.
Was that change to try and maintain the line that this was opinion evidence rather than expert evidence?
Anne Chambers was a subject matter expert, but she wasn't a CPR Part 35 expert. I think that the change was to put the statement into language that she was content with saying, and I don't think it was about whether it. I don't think we were thinking, is it opinion? Is it fact specifically? I think it was more about, look, this is the witness. She's got to be completely happy with her evidence.
Do you think she could have said that there was no evidence whatsoever of any system problem? Because I think your evidence earlier was she didn't interrogate the entire system.
She didn't, and so she was wanting to talk about the investigation she had carried out and what she hadn't done. She didn't represent to the court that she had carried out a huge investigation of the system. She was quite specific with the trial judge, about what she had done and the limits of it. So we were changing her statement that made it more accurate and put it into the words with which she was content.
Would it have been more accurate on the left-hand side to have added words such as affecting Lee Castleton's specific branch, where she says, my conclusion was that there was no evidence whatsoever of any system?
It was blindingly obvious at the trial, blindingly obvious that was what she was talking about. She was not absolutely saying, and we didn't say to the trial judge, in fact it was the opposite. We said, and you'll see it in our note of the trial, we said, we are not saying this system is free of problems, generally. That was put before the judge. So it was blindingly obvious. I think this is one of the things where we're all looking back, as we only can, 17 years later, and going, could we have done this? Could we have done that? But at the time, we were satisfied, and she was satisfied that it was clear, and it was.
You say it was blindingly obvious.
At the trial, yeah, at the trial.
Reading that,
really clear.
Reading that statement, it's rather close to the line, isn't it?
Look, she was... I just don't think I can add to my evidence on this point. She had to be satisfied with what she was saying. And I think if we looked at page 16, which she refers to of her exhibit, which was in page 338 of the trial bundle, I see, the conclusion was reflecting actually something that she had written at the time.
The one on the right-hand side, though, there was no evidence whatsoever of any system problem. That as originally drafted by you, was plainly wrong, wasn't it?
It needed, yeah. Well, she was not content to say that, and it was right that she had to talk about her investigation.
The very final document that I'm going to take you to is FUJ 00152299. And this is the document that you referred us to, the afterthoughts on the Castleton case. I'm going to skip through it very briefly because we will be hearing from Ms. Chambers. But the review of technical evidence, she says that she was concerned that there was no technical review of the Horizon evidence before the original call and going to court. She says, once in court, I found myself being treated as an expert witness and answering a wide variety of questions about the system, although nominally I was a witness of fact, and my witness statement covered just the investigation done in 2004. She goes on in the final paragraph there to say, if there are similar cases in the future where the system is being blamed, would it be sensible to have a technical review of all of the evidence? Was that her criticism there? Do you think that was a fair criticism of the way that the case was conducted?
Let's break it down into parts, because she has quite a lot there. Once in court, I felt myself being treated as an expert witness. I suspect, if this is my conjecture, if you said to Anne Chambers, do you mean a CPR Part 35 witness? She'd said, what's CPR 35? I think it is fair to say, and perhaps more accurate to say, she was regarded as somebody, rightly regarded as somebody who was knowledgeable about the Horizon system. She was, and that's how she came across. I think the other She then talks about I was able to fulfil the wider role. I think what she might be driving at there is the Calendar Square bug issue that got raised shortly before the trial, upon which she was then asked, and it was handy because she was the person who had investigated the Calendar Square bug, and she was able to. So I think that's the context in which she's talking.
Do you think you properly explained to her the difference between an expert witness and a witness of fact?
This is a very long time ago to remember specific conversations and advice, but I'm sure we would have been alive to that. We certainly made it clear to Fujitsu in the end that if we were going to get an expert evidence, it wouldn't be them, notwithstanding the letter I sent to them on the 22nd of November. So had we been concerned about that, I'm sure we would have dealt with it properly.
Do you think that the way that the evidence had been presented put her in a difficult position in that respect?
No.
Scrolling down to disclosure of evidence very briefly, she said that Fujitsu made a major legal blunder by not disclosing the relevant evidence that was in existence. I found myself in the invidious position of being aware of some information, Tivoli event logs, they existed, but not sure whether they should be disclosed, etc. And scrolling down, she refers to a conversation, I think, with yourself.
Yeah, and she quotes from something that,
Yes.
that I must have said.
And she says, this suggests that the disclosure of the message store itself was an afterthought, though it is fundamental to the system, etc. She refers to fraud cases. She says many other files are also archived to the audit servers as a matter of course and could hold relevant information. Although the security team are not necessarily aware of their existence or potential relevance, I'd like to suggest that a list of these files is compiled so that similar mistakes are not made in future. And what about calls on peak, which may have evidence attached, etc.? Do you think that her criticisms of the lack of disclosure that was made to Mr. Castleton are fair?
No.
And why not?
I'd need to take you to the part of my statement dealing with the signature of the first disclosure list and the email conversation I was having with somebody called, I think she's called Vicky Young, to begin to explain that.
Can you briefly summarise what the point is that you would like to make on that?
Vicky Harrison. Vicky Harrison, I said to Post Office, look, you've got a duty to carry out this reasonable search. The penalties for not disclosing are severe or something like that. We have to be thorough. And Vicky Harrison wrote to me, I think it is set out in my statement, and said, what I believe to be the case, which you've got this, you've got that, this is how I've done it, including this stuff from Fujitsu. And so I believed that, absolutely believed that Post Office had more than carried out their duties of carrying out a reasonable search. All that said, as I've said, we did disclose other documents after our list of disclosure was prepared, including Tivoli events logs, which is different from an events log, but actually the disclosure of that turned out to be a non-issue. It didn't help Post Office's case, but it didn't help Mr. Castleton's case either.
Looking at the reflections of a witness in the case, a witness with significant experience with the Horizon system, looking back at all you did, do you think that you could have made and should have made wider disclosure than in fact you did make to Mr. Castleton?
No.
So those are all the questions that I have. There are a number of questions from core participants. I think we're going to hear from Miss Page first. I suspect we may go on beyond 4:30, or are likely to go beyond
Well,
4:30.
I'm not sure about that. This is all what I might call detailed and intricate evidence, and I want to ensure that my concentration levels are the same now as they were about 5 hours ago. So I'm not at all sure that I'm going to be prepared to sit for any significant length of time beyond 4:30. So I think we need to have a realistic time estimate now of how much further questioning there is and decide how we deal with that. So can I first of all ask Ms. Page what she has in mind, since she obviously represents Mr. Castleton, and this is primarily, if not exclusively, about Mr. Castleton.
Thank you, sir. I was hoping or planning to take around 40 minutes.
Right? Are there other counsel who wish to question?
There are. Miss Dobbin has some questions, but I don't think a great deal of questions.
So I wasn't anticipating being anywhere as long as so probably about 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes on behalf of Mr. Jenkins.
Well, I am prepared to have 20 minutes worth of questions now, but then I fear Mr. Dilley will have to return either tomorrow or at some other suitable occasion, which is convenient to everyone involved.
Thank you, sir. Can I just check with Miss Page whether she would still like to go first in light of that, or whether she'd like the evening?
I'm content to go first.
Thank you.
Well, then bring it to a close, Miss Page, at around about 4:20, all right?
Certainly, sir. Well, Mr. Dilley, you'll have gathered from that alongside a number of other sub-postmasters, I represent Mr. Castleton, who sits to my right.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Dilley, do you say that Mr. Castleton has fabricated his evidence to this inquiry, in that he says that there was a conversation in which you told him that the post office would ruin him?
I don't believe that in making that comment, Mr. Castleton has been dishonest, but I do believe that he is mistaken.
Do you recognise that this case was a life-changing catastrophe for Mr. Castleton?
I imagine it was, yes.
Do you not think that moments like this were seared onto his memory?
I don't believe that his recollection of that conversation was accurate.
When settlement was discussed, Mr. Dilley, at no stage did Post Office offer to pay Mr. Castleton anything, did they?
There was no offer from either side to pay to the other person anything. That's correct.
Seeking settlement just meant that Post Office wanted him to pay the claim and say that Horizon was working.
I remember writing to Mr. Castleton's solicitors, trying to persuade them and Mr. Castleton to come to mediation, and citing specifically a case that said, until you get into the settlement meeting, you don't really know the bottom line.
Well, you say that your only regret in the way that this case panned out was that you didn't manage to settle the claim. So what you do there, really, Mr. Dilley, you may think, is that you turn Mr. Castleton's courage around. In his courageous refusal to pay a debt he didn't owe, you say, oh, what a shame he didn't agree to pay that debt.
Sorry, I haven't got any comment on Mr. Castleton's courage. I have no doubt, though, that going to trial was difficult for him. It's difficult for any litigant.
And your only regret is that he didn't agree to pay a debt that he did not owe?
I regret that the parties were unable to meet each other round the table on a without prejudice basis and try to resolve their differences. That's not just, when you go to these meetings, it's not just about money. I think it would have been quite powerful, for example, for Post Office to have said, as I did to Mr. Castleton in 2 conversations, it's not part of our case that you have been dishonest. I think it would have been helpful to have said that in a meeting if we'd have been able to get there.
We'll pass over, perhaps, the need for Mr. Castleton to have judgment from the Post Office on his honesty and instead turn to a document, poll 3072691. If we look at the middle paragraph of this telephone note of your call with Mandy Talbot, it says that she reiterated that the Post Office are not going to settle this case lightly. Mm-hmm. Her view is that they should take it to trial, just to take a firm line, etc. We've heard this sort of thing before. But the final sentence, however, we should be seen to be settling. And that's why she is willing to agree to Castleton's offer of mediation. We should be seen to be settling. The offers of mediation were never sincere, were they, Mr. Dilley? It was a sham.
I completely disagree. It was so serious. We wrote and wrote and wrote. Mr. Castleton's solicitors blowed hot and cold, and I have set out in pages 107 to 111
heard you say
the
that
instances
before.
of it.
If we can go, please, to another document, poll 3072741. And if we could go, please, to page 2 and scroll down to the bottom. This is a note of a meeting between you and Counsel Richard Morgan, and your partner was there as well, Mr. Beezer. And you interject at the bottom of page 2, SD, I assume, being you. This would have settled without the computer/Horizon issues and the subsequent sub-postmasters bloggers website. Yeah? So that's you telling Counsel that the case would have settled absent the Horizon issues.
I certainly think that complicated this. It made it way beyond, as we've heard this morning, Post Office's original goal of what they saw as a debt claim. It absolutely complicated it. That's absolutely fair to say.
All right. Well, let's go to Counsel's reaction towards the end of the meeting, which is on page 6 of this note, and the second paragraph. RM, Richard Morgan, stating that it should be stated to Poll that this is madness, and we could settle with drop hands and the confidentiality clause. And then he goes on to talk about an estimate of costs. Madness. Do you accept that's his advice?
If you look at this case in isolation as an economic exercise in the recovery of money, I do.
Right, well, let's look at how this advice was communicated to Post Office, because they were not at that conference. If we turn to poll 3071081, please. And if we go to page 2, please, about halfway down, and there's that paragraph that says, that just, I'm taking this quite briefly, but this letter is basically following the conference with Counsel and passing on various points from the conference to council. It was written by Mr. Beezer. That paragraph at the bottom of the page, as we discussed, brackets, and apologies for raising this matter again. I know you are aware of this advice, but I raise it here for the sake of completeness. The costs of pursuing this claim will significantly exceed what is at stake. Accordingly, even if you win, the Post Office will almost certainly not make a net gain, as your costs will be assessed, possibly capped, irrecoverable, exceed the value of the claim. In any event, you may well find it difficult to enforce any judgment because of Mr. Castleton's asset position. Accordingly, the purpose of pursuing this claim now is not to make a net financial recovery, but to defend the Horizon system and hopefully send a clear message to other sub-postmasters that the Post Office will take a firm line, etc.
Yeah.
What is not said is that this is madness. Nothing like. Council's advice was not passed on, was it?
I don't agree. I think it's certainly true that the word madness wasn't used, but the sentiment in council's advice was absolutely passed on.
All right. The opening sentence, do you accept that this is effectively Mr. Beezer expressing to Post Office the fact that he's already well aware that Post Office are not going to listen to reason on this?
No, I think Post Office had their reason, but their reason hadn't become a net economic recovery in this case. It's how it started, but it had changed.
The only way that they were going to settle this case was strictly on their own terms, wasn't it?
Where does it say that?
Well, I'm inferring it from the fact that there was no prospect of settling this case in a way that was going to satisfy their purpose unless Mr. Castleton paid the claim and said Horizon was working.
I certainly think that the longer the claim went on, the harder it became to settle. That's right. And that's why, you know, before the costs got really high, we'd offered mediation in November 2005. And it's right to record that. And the longer they went on, the more money they'd spent on it, I think probably the more they wanted out of it. What we'll never know, because we never went to a settlement meeting. So let's imagine we'd have gone to a settlement meeting and Mr. Castleton had said, hello, Stephen Dilley, Post Office, my assets are X. I will, look, so, you know, there's no economic point in this, but I will accept if we are able to reach a settlement that I withdraw my allegations about Horizon System. We will now never know whether that would have resulted in a settlement. But I think at some point we would have worked very hard to recommend that sort of proposal to Post Office, but we will now never know.
Well, I'm not going to go back over ground that you've already been taken to this morning. What I would like to go to, though, is the final exchanges on this issue, which is at poll 3069775. And if we go down, please, to start off with page 3 of this document. This is in the November before the trial in the December. And the email we're looking at now is from Ms. Talbot to the business, but also copying you in. And she says that everyone will be pleased to know that the solicitors acting for Castleton have substantially accepted our counter-proposal. And in brief, the counter-proposal is that Mr. Castleton was to pay everything and was to give a non-disparagement I think that was the legal terminology being used, a non-disparagement undertaking to the effect that Horizon was working fine, and we see that at the bottom. I, Mr. Lee Castleton, the former postmaster at Marine Drive Post Office, admit that a sum of money was owed by me to Post Office as a result of errors which arose while I was the postmaster. I had thought that this debt arose due to a malfunction of the Horizon system, but I now accept that I was mistaken and that the debt arose out of human error. I declare that the Horizon system did not contribute to the errors in any way and formally withdraw all statements I made to the contrary. That was the attempt to resolve the case before trial in the November, isn't it?
It wasn't the attempt, it was an attempt, but there were several rounds of conversation between respective counsel. And in terms of disparagement, there was a mutual disparagement. So Post Office were to also, my recollection was, withdraw their, any suggestion, which they hadn't made, by the way, that Mr. Castleton had been dishonest. So it was a two-way street.
This was the Post Office getting everything that they wanted, wasn't it?
I certainly thought it would have been a really good result for Post Office.
Yeah.
But I also think it would have been a good result overall. It would have saved significant amount of money, for example, and it would have avoided the stress of a trial.
Mr. Castleton paying a debt that he didn't owe and paying costs that had been run up expediently and in order to make him into an example to hold up to others. That would have been a good result for him, would it?
The judge found, having heard the evidence from all the witnesses at the time...
Well, let's just focus on whether that would have been a good result for Mr. Castleton, shall we?
His solicitors had advised him, and they told me they'd advised him to settle, and that they thought that he had a bad case.
You were aware, weren't you, that at this point in time, Mr. Castleton was not well, weren't you?
At some point, he did become ill. That's right.
Yes. Let's just go up, please, to the response from the business. It's on page 2. And what we see is a response from Keith K. Baines. Mm-hmm. And it's addressed to Mandy Talbot, and there are various people from Post Office copied in. I don't know if any of these names mean anything to you. Biddy Wiles?
That name is familiar. I think she might have been in the legal team.
Claire Wardle, likewise in the legal team, I believe.
Yes, yes.
And then we see a John D. Cole, a Marie Cockett, a Richard W. Barker, a Rod Ismay. Are these people that you communicated with directly at any stage before?
Not insofar as I recall.
No. So on this occasion, and only on this occasion, you received an email direct from Keith Baines in the business, and it was because he got involved with the wording of the non-disparagement clause, isn't it? Do you see that? Mm-hmm. So it was the only thing that they cared about, really, wasn't it?
It did become really important to them. I don't think it was the only thing, but it was certainly an important thing.
The offers to mediate were a sham, weren't they, Mr. Dilley?
Absolutely not.
They wanted this wording to show off, to make sure that all of the sub-postmasters out there who might be bringing claims against them, blaming Horizon, would cower and would go away. That's what this case was all about, wasn't it, Mr. Dilley?
You're asking me to give evidence about Post Office's state of mind, and I think that's more accurately put to them. I've given the evidence that I can do about their thinking, especially throughout the morning session.
So that may be a good moment to break off.
All right. First of all, Mr. Dilley, are you able to return tomorrow morning without very considerable inconvenience to you.
I can. I would much prefer to get finished today if we can, and I would be
Well,
happy to
I
sit down.
appreciate that. I understand that, and normally I would do my best to accommodate a witness, but I have decided that I need to be concentrating fully on every aspect of your evidence, and it's very difficult to keep concentrating from now on. And I'm afraid that's a reason why I'm calling a halt. I appreciate that that will inconvenience you, and I would wish to avoid it, but I don't think I can. So, is anybody else who wishes to participate in the sense of asking Mr. Dilley questions unable to appear tomorrow morning?
No, sir.
Then we'll resume tomorrow morning. Is there a need to start a little earlier tomorrow morning to accommodate both Mr. Dilley and Mr. Morgan?
I'm told by Mr. Beer that there is no problem with Mr. Dilley returning tomorrow morning. It may be, perhaps we could ask Mr. Dilley whether he would prefer an earlier start to the usual start.
That would be very kind if you could.
Well, certainly I'm prepared to start at 9:30.
Thank you, sir. So perhaps we can resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning.
And is it just Miss Page and counsel for Mr. Jenkins, did you say, Mr.
Yes, Miss Dobbin.
Yeah. So we're looking at a maximum of another 45 minutes or thereabouts.
Yes, that's correct.
Fine. All right.
So,
So,
can we give Mr. Dilley the usual warnings in respect
Yeah,
of this?
I'm sure that it's correct that I do so, Mr. Dilley, even though I'm equally sure that you wouldn't dream of talking to anyone about your evidence. That would be the last thing you would want to do, I assume, having talked about it all day. But anyway, I do ask you to refrain from discussing your evidence with anyone. And I'll see you again at 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.